Wardum King, if you are over 60 and you use this common spice every single day, what I am about to tell you could save your life, because there is one ingredient sitting in your kitchen right now, probably within arm's reach as you listen to this, and it is silently pushing your blood pressure higher and higher with every meal you eat. Margaret, 72 years old, a retired librarian from Portland, sat across from me in my office last month with tears streaming down her face. She grabbed my hand and said, "Dr. Harrison, I have done everything right. I walk every morning. I eat my vegetables. I take my medication exactly like you told me. So why does my blood pressure keep climbing? Why do I feel like a ticking time bomb?" And I had to tell her the truth. Because Margaret, like millions of adults over 60, had no idea that this one spice, this common ingredient she had been using her entire life, was working against every single healthy choice she made. It was like she was trying to fill a bathtub while someone else kept pulling out the drain plug. No matter how much water she added, it kept disappearing. What I am about to share with you comes from decades of research, including groundbreaking work from Japanese physicians who discovered something remarkable about how our bodies change after 60. And in just 21 days, what you learn today could transform your blood pressure readings in ways that will shock you and your doctor both. Let me tell you about Margaret first, because her story is probably your story too. She grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where Sunday dinners meant fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans cooked with a ham hock. Food meant love, seasoning meant flavor, and nobody, not a single person in her life, ever told her that the way she learned to cook could one day threaten her health. For 68 years, Margaret did what her mother did. She reached for that shaker on the counter without even thinking about it. It was automatic. It was unconscious. It was like breathing. And here is the thing that breaks my heart. Margaret was doing everything else right. She walked 2 miles every single morning. She ate salmon twice a week because she heard it was good for her heart. She took her blood pressure medication at the same time every day, 7 o'clock sharp, never missed a dose. But her numbers kept creeping up. 140 over 90, 145 over 92, 150 over 95. She looked at me with those frightened eyes and whispered, "Am I going to have a stroke, doctor? Is that what happens next?" I want you to understand something before we go any further. This is not about blame. This is not about guilt. Margaret did nothing wrong because she did not know. Nobody told her. The information I am about to share with you has been hidden in plain sight for decades, and it took physicians in Japan studying the longest-lived populations on Earth to finally connect the dots in a way that makes sense. Let me introduce you to Robert. Robert is 67 years old, a retired truck driver from Memphis. Big man, strong hands, spent 40 years behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler. When Robert came to see me, his blood pressure was 162 over 104. That is dangerously high. That is the kind of number that keeps doctors awake at night. Robert slammed his fist on my desk, not in anger but in frustration. He said, "Doc, I already cut out the fast food. I stopped drinking beer. I even started eating those little salads my wife makes. What else do you want from me?" And when I asked Robert about his home cooking, about his wife's famous fried catfish and cornbread, about the seasoning she used, he looked at me like I had grown a second head. He said, "What do you mean, seasoning? That is just how food tastes. That is just cooking." That is when I knew Robert was in the exact same trap as Margaret. He was doing everything right except for one thing, and that one thing was undoing all his hard work. It was like he was swimming upstream against a current he could not even see. Here is what the Japanese research discovered, and this is absolutely fascinating. When you are young, your body has a remarkable ability to handle excess amounts of this common spice. Think of it like a kitchen sink with a wide-open drain. You pour water in, it drains right out. No problem. Your kidneys are young and strong, they process everything efficiently, and your blood vessels are flexible and responsive. But after 60, everything changes. It is like someone slowly narrowed that drain. The same amount of water goes in, but now it backs up. It pools. It creates pressure. Your kidneys cannot process this spice as efficiently as they used to. Your blood vessels have lost some of their flexibility, like an old garden hose that has been left out in the sun too many summers. And suddenly, the same amount of this ingredient that was fine when you were 40 is now creating a flood inside your body. This is not speculation. This is not alternative medicine. This is documented, peer-reviewed science that has been validated by cardiovascular researchers around the world. But here is what really made me sit up and pay attention. The Japanese physicians noticed something remarkable about villages in Okinawa where people routinely lived past 100 years old. These centenarians had blood pressure readings that American doctors would envy, numbers that seemed almost impossible for people their age. And when researchers studied their diets, they found one consistent pattern. These long-lived Okinawans used dramatically less of this common spice than anywhere else in the developed world, not because they were told to, not because they were on some special diet, but because their traditional cooking methods simply did not rely on it the way Western cooking does. Let me tell you about Dorothy. She is 71, a grandmother of 6, retired school teacher from Cleveland. Dorothy is the kind of woman who lights up a room when she walks in. Warm smile, quick laugh, always got a cookie in her purse for any child who needs one. But when Dorothy came to see me, she was not smiling. She said, "Dr. Harrison, I cannot play with my grandchildren anymore. I get dizzy when I stand up. I get headaches that feel like someone is squeezing my skull. My doctor says my blood pressure is out of control, and he wants to put me on a third medication. A third one. I am already taking so many pills I rattle when I walk." Dorothy was describing exactly what happens when your blood pressure stays elevated for too long. Think of your blood vessels like a garden hose. If you turn the water pressure up too high, two things happen. First, the hose bulges and strains under the pressure. Second, eventually it starts to crack. That is what high blood pressure does to your arteries. It strains them, it damages them, and over time it can lead to consequences none of us want to think about. But here is what broke my heart about Dorothy. She was already trying so hard. She had cut out red meat. She had stopped eating fried foods. She had even given up her beloved sweet tea, the drink she had enjoyed every single day since childhood. And still her blood pressure was climbing, because nobody told her about the one thing she needed to stop. I want you to imagine something. Imagine you have a swimming pool in your backyard. Beautiful pool, crystal clear water, the kind of pool where you can see all the way to the bottom. Now imagine someone starts dumping something into that pool every single day. Not a lot, just a little bit. Day after day, week after week. At first you do not notice anything. The pool still looks clear. The water still feels fine. But slowly, so slowly, you cannot even detect it happening. The water gets cloudier. The chemistry gets thrown off. The filters have to work harder and harder. And one day you wake up and your pool is a murky mess. That is exactly what this common spice does inside your body over decades of use. It accumulates, it builds up, it throws off the delicate balance that keeps your blood pressure in check. And by the time you notice something is wrong, the damage has been building for years. Now, I am going to tell you what this spice is, but first I need you to understand something that took me years of medical practice to fully appreciate. Knowledge without action is worthless. Information that does not change behavior is just noise. So I am not just going to tell you what to stop eating. I am going to tell you exactly how to replace it with something better. Something that will not only protect your blood pressure, but might actually enhance the flavor of your food in ways you never expected. This is the part where I need you to stay with me, because what I am about to tell you is going to seem incredibly simple. And when I told Margaret, when I told Robert, when I told Dorothy, they all had the same reaction. They looked at me like I was crazy. They said, "That is it? That is the big secret? That is what has been causing all this trouble?" Yes, that is it. And its simplicity is exactly why it is so dangerous, because we have been so conditioned to accept it as normal, as necessary, as just the way food is supposed to taste, that we never question it. The spice I am talking about, the ingredient that the Japanese research identified as the #1 dietary threat to blood pressure in adults over 60, is common table salt. Now, before you roll your eyes, before you say you have heard this before, let me explain why this time is different. Because you probably have been told to reduce your salt intake, and you probably tried for a week or two and then gave up because your food tasted like cardboard. I understand. That is exactly what happens to almost everyone who tries to cut back on salt without a proper replacement strategy. Here is why salt is particularly dangerous after 60. When you consume salt, your body holds onto water to dilute it. Think of it like adding salt to a pot of soup. If you add too much salt, the only way to fix it is to add more liquid. Your body does the same thing. It holds onto fluid to dilute the excess salt in your blood. And when you have more fluid in your blood vessels, your blood pressure goes up. When you were younger, your kidneys could quickly flush out excess salt. They were like a high-powered pump that could handle anything you threw at them. But after 60, those pumps are not as efficient. The salt stays in your system longer, the fluid builds up more, and your blood pressure pays the price. This is why Dorothy, Margaret, and Robert were all struggling. They were doing everything right, except for the one thing that mattered most. They were still reaching for that salt shaker without even thinking about it. Let me tell you about Harold, 69 years old, retired electrician from Detroit. Harold was what I call a salt lover. He put salt on everything, eggs, tomatoes, even watermelon. His wife used to joke that he would put salt on salt if he could. When Harold came to see me, his blood pressure was 158/98. His ankles were swollen, his face was puffy, his wedding ring, the same ring he had worn for 43 years, suddenly did not fit anymore. His body was literally expanding with retained fluid. Harold grabbed my arm and said, with genuine fear in his voice, "Doc, am I dying? Is this what the end looks like?" No, Harold was not dying, but he was standing at a crossroads. He could either keep doing what he was doing and watch his health deteriorate, or he could make one simple change and potentially transform his life. Here is what I told Harold, and this is exactly what I am going to tell you. The solution is not about deprivation. It is not about suffering through bland, tasteless food. It is about replacement. It is about finding something better, something that actually enhances flavor while protecting your health instead of destroying it. The Japanese physicians who studied the Okinawan centenarians discovered that these long-lived people did not just avoid salt. They replaced it with a sophisticated blend of herbs and natural seasonings that enhanced the taste of food without raising blood pressure. Things like ginger, garlic, turmeric, various peppers, citrus zest, and fermented seasonings that added depth and complexity to every meal. Imagine you have been driving the same car for 60 years. It is the only car you have ever known, and then someone shows you a completely different kind of vehicle, one that is faster, more comfortable, better in every way. That is what happens when you replace salt with proper herb blends. You discover a whole world of flavor you never knew existed. Let me tell you what happened to Margaret. Remember Margaret, the retired librarian who came to me in tears? I asked her to do one thing for 21 days, just 3 weeks. I asked her to put the salt shaker in a cabinet where she could not see it, and replace it with a blend of garlic powder, onion powder, black pepper, a little bit of dried thyme, and some lemon zest. Margaret called me 14 days later, and I could hear the shock in her voice. She said, "Dr. Harrison, I checked my blood pressure this morning. It has not been this low in 5 years. And here is the thing that really surprised me. My food tastes better. Not worse. Better. I can actually taste the tomatoes now. I can taste the chicken. Before, everything just tasted like salt." That is what happens when you remove the substance that has been numbing your taste buds for decades. It is like taking off a pair of sunglasses you forgot you were wearing. Suddenly you can see colors you never noticed before. Robert, the retired truck driver, had a similar experience. His wife started cooking with herbs instead of salt, and within 3 weeks his blood pressure dropped from 162/104 to 138/86. His doctor actually reduced his medication, and Robert, this tough, no-nonsense trucker, got a little emotional when he told me about it. He said, "Doc, my father died of a stroke at 63. I always figured I was next. Now I feel like I got a second chance. But I want to be honest with you about something. This is not easy at first. Your taste buds have been conditioned by decades of salt exposure. They have been trained to expect a certain flavor profile. When you first remove salt from your diet, everything will taste different. Not bad, just different. Think of it like learning to appreciate a new kind of music. The first time you hear jazz, if you have only ever listened to rock and roll, it sounds strange. But after a while, your ears adjust. You start to hear the complexity, the nuances, the beauty that was always there but that you could not perceive before. The same thing happens with your taste buds. Within about 2 weeks, they start to recalibrate. They become more sensitive. Foods you thought were bland suddenly become flavorful, and foods you used to love that were loaded with salt suddenly taste overwhelming, like someone screaming when a whisper would do. Dorothy, the grandmother who could not play with her grandchildren, called me after 18 days. She was crying again, but this time from joy. She said, "I took my grandchildren to the park yesterday. We walked for an hour. I pushed them on the swings. I chased them around the playground, and I did not get dizzy once. Not once." My youngest grandson looked at me and said, "Grandma, you are not sitting on the bench anymore." And I told him, "No, baby, Grandma is back. That is why I do this. That is why I spend my days in this clinic, seeing patient after patient. Not for the complicated cases, not for the rare diseases, but for moments like that. Moments when I can give a grandmother back her grandchildren. Moments when I can give a husband back his future. Moments when I can take someone standing at the edge of a cliff and show them there is another path." Let me tell you about one more patient, because his story is particularly powerful. His name is Walter, 74 years old, retired postal worker from Chicago. Walter had been on blood pressure medication for 18 years, 3 different drugs taken twice a day. He had made peace with it. He figured this was just what getting old looked like. But then Walter's grandson showed him some videos about natural health, and Walter started asking questions. He asked me, Dr. Harrison, is there anything I can do besides take pills? Is there any way to actually fix this problem instead of just managing it? I told Walter the same thing I am telling you. Yes, there is a way, but it requires you to change something you have done unconsciously every single day of your adult life. It requires you to put down the salt shaker and pick up something better. Walter was skeptical. He said, Doc, I am 74 years old. I have been eating this way since Eisenhower was president. You think I can change now? And I looked him in the eye and said, Walter, I have seen 70-year-olds run marathons. I have seen 80-year-olds learn new languages. I have seen 90-year-olds fall in love again. Your body and your brain are more adaptable than you give them credit for. The question is not whether you can change. The question is whether you are willing to try. Walter tried. His wife bought a spice rack full of herbs and seasonings. She got creative with garlic and ginger and citrus. She discovered that a little bit of vinegar could add the kind of brightness that salt used to provide. And 21 days later, Walter sat in my office with the biggest grin I had ever seen. His blood pressure had dropped from 154/96 to 128/80. His doctor cut one of his medications entirely and reduced the dose of another. Walter grabbed both my hands in his, tears in his eyes, and said, I thought the best years were behind me, Doc. I thought I was just running out the clock. Now I feel like I got extra innings. Here is what I want you to understand. This is not about perfect. This is not about never touching salt again for the rest of your life. It is about awareness. This is about making conscious choices instead of automatic ones. This is about understanding that the way you have been eating is not a law of nature, it is just a habit, and habits can be changed. The Japanese research showed that even small reductions in salt intake could produce significant improvements in blood pressure. You do not have to go from adding salt to everything to adding salt to nothing overnight. You can start gradually. This week, use half as much salt as you normally would. Next week, cut it in half again. Replace what you remove with herbs and spices and natural seasonings. Think of it like turning down the volume on a radio. You do not go from full blast to silent in one move. You adjust gradually, and as you turn down the salt, your taste buds will adjust. They will become more sensitive. They will start to detect flavors they never noticed before. Here is something else the Japanese physicians discovered that I find absolutely fascinating. When people switched from salt to herb-based seasonings, they did not just improve their blood pressure, they reported feeling better overall, more energy, better sleep, less bloating, fewer headaches. It was like removing a weight they did not even know they were carrying. This makes perfect sense when you understand what excess salt does to your body. It is not just about blood pressure. Excess salt causes inflammation. It causes fluid retention. It makes your heart work harder. It affects your kidneys, your brain, your joints. When you reduce your salt intake, you are not fixing one problem. You are giving your entire body a chance to heal. I want to come back to Margaret one last time because her story has a beautiful ending. 6 months after our first conversation, Margaret came back for a checkup. She walked into my office with a completely different energy. She was standing taller. Her eyes were brighter. She moved like someone 10 years younger. She sat down across from me and said, Dr. Harrison, I need to tell you something. Last week I went to my high school reunion, 64th reunion. Can you believe that? And people I had not seen in decades kept coming up to me asking what my secret was. They said I looked younger than I did at the 60th reunion. They asked if I had gotten work done. And Margaret laughed, this wonderful, joyful laugh, and she said I told them my secret was putting down the salt shaker. They thought I was joking, but I was not joking. It really is that simple. It really is that powerful. Margaret's blood pressure that day was 118/74, better than it had been in 20 years. Her doctor had reduced her medication. She was walking 3 miles every morning instead of 2. She was sleeping better. She had more energy to spend time with her grandchildren, all because she made one change. One simple change that seems almost too easy to be real, but it is real. The science is real. The results are real, and they can be your results too. Here is what I want you to do right now, today. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Go to your kitchen and find the salt shaker, the one you reach for automatically every time you cook or sit down to eat. Take it off the counter or off the table and put it somewhere out of sight, in a cabinet, in a drawer, somewhere you have to consciously look for it. Then go to the spice aisle of your grocery store and buy some basic herbs, garlic powder, onion powder, black pepper, oregano, thyme, paprika, lemon pepper. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, Just basic seasonings that have been flavoring food since long before salt shakers were invented. Give yourself 21 days. That is all I am asking. 3 weeks of conscious effort. 3 weeks of reaching for the herb blend instead of the salt shaker. 3 weeks of letting your taste buds recalibrate and your body heal. Check your blood pressure at the beginning of those 21 days and again at the end. I think you are going to be amazed at what you find. And here is the thing that makes me smile every time I think about it. Unlike medication, this approach has no side effects, no dizziness, no fatigue, no dry mouth, no increased urination. The only side effect of replacing salt with herbs is that your food might actually taste better once your taste buds wake up. Walter told me something that stuck with me. He said, "Doc, for 74 years I thought I knew what good food tasted like. Turns out I had no idea. I was just tasting salt. Now I am tasting food." That is what awaits you on the other side of this simple change. A whole new world of flavor you never knew existed, and blood pressure numbers that will make you and your doctor smile. I think about my patients every day. I think about Margaret returning to her book club with renewed energy. I think about Robert planning a cross-country road trip with his wife, something he thought he would never have the health to do. I think about Dorothy chasing her grandchildren around the playground without getting dizzy. I think about Harold finally getting his wedding ring back on his finger after the swelling went down. I think about Walter getting those extra innings he thought were impossible. These are not exceptional people. They are ordinary people who made one extraordinary decision. They decided that their health was worth changing a habit. They decided that 21 days of adjustment was a fair price for years of better living. And now I am asking you to make that same decision. Your blood pressure does not have to keep climbing. Your medication doses do not have to keep increasing. You do not have to accept that this is just what getting older looks like, because it is not. High blood pressure is not an inevitable consequence of aging. It is often the consequence of habits that can be changed. The Japanese centenarians proved that. These 100-year-olds with the blood pressure of much younger people proved that there is another way, a way that does not involve deprivation or suffering, or eating food that tastes like cardboard, a way that involves rediscovering the natural flavors that salt has been covering up your entire life. If you know someone who is struggling with their blood pressure, someone who feels like they are doing everything right but still cannot get their numbers under control, please share this with them, because sometimes all we need is for someone to say, "Hey, listen to this, it might help, it might be the answer you have been looking for, it might be the one thing nobody else ever thought to tell you." That is what Margaret needed, that is what Robert needed, that is what Dorothy and Harold and Walter needed, and maybe, just maybe, that is what you needed too. Put down the salt shaker, pick up the herbs, give yourself 21 days, and then come back and tell me how different you feel, because you deserve those extra innings. You deserve to chase your grandchildren around the playground. You deserve to feel like the best years might still be ahead of you, no matter what number your birthday candles add up to. That is not a fantasy. That is not false hope. That is what I have seen happen in my clinic, with my patients, over and over again. And I believe with all my heart that it can happen for you too.